Hello, score listeners. I'm so sorry I did not get, I just didn't read yesterday. I ain't got no excuse. I just didn't. Sorriness. But look, I finished a hat. Woohoo! And ta-da! Here's the Aquarius I was griping about not getting yesterday. Isn't it glorious? Looks like water. Yep, it's a big M. It's an M, it's an 8. Be great for basket making. It also makes this part of this hat came out much smaller. I must have not, I didn't count like I was supposed to. Well, I counted, but I didn't count. I thought I did. The beginning repeats. Because look how big this one is. I mean, look at my hat hair. Look at that. Just look at it. But it's fine. I mean, it fits. It fits just perfect. As long as it goes down over my ears, I'm a happy granny. I know, I should have that light coming down on me, but let's do that so you're not seeing so much of the ceiling. Okay, oh no. Here we go. We were in the middle of a chapter, so. In the big bedroom overlooking the sea, Conway Jefferson was sitting in his, it says wheeled chair, but I'm just going to say wheelchair, by the window. No sooner were you in the room with him than you felt the power and magnetism of the man. It was as though the injuries which had left him crippled had resulted in concentrating the vitality of his shattered body into a narrower and more intense focus. He had a fine head, the red of the hair slightly grizzled. The face was rugged and powerful, deeply suntanned, and the eyes were a startling blue. There was no sign of illness or feebleness about him. The deep lines on his face were the lines of suffering, not the lines of weakness. Here was a man who would never rail against fate, but accept it and pass on to victory. He said, "I'm glad you've come." His quick eyes took them in. He said to Melchett, "You're the chief constable of Radfordshire, right? And you're Superintendent Harper? Sit down. Cigarettes on the table beside you." They thanked him and sat down. Melchett said, "I understand, Mr. Jefferson, that you were interested in the dead girl?" A quick, twisted smile flashed across the lined face. "Yes, they've all told you that. Well, it's no secret. How much has my family said to you?" He looked quickly from one to the other as he asked the question. It was Melchett who answered. "Mrs. Jefferson told us very little beyond the fact that the girl's chatter amused you and that she was by way of being a prodigy. We have only exchanged half a dozen words with Mr. Gaskell." Conway Jefferson smiled. "Addie's a discreet creature, bless her. Mark would probably have been more outspoken. I think, Melchett, that I'd better tell you some facts rather fully. It's important in order that you should understand my attitude. And to begin with, it's necessary that I go back to the big tragedy of my life. 8 years ago, I lost my wife, my son, and my daughter in an airplane accident." It says aeroplane. "Since then, I've been like a man who's lost half himself, and I'm not speaking of my physical plight. I was a family man. My daughter-in-law and my son-in-law have been very good to me. They've done all they can to take the place of my flesh and blood, but I've realized, especially of late, that they have, after all, their own lives to live. So you must understand that, essentially, I'm a lonely man. I like young people, I enjoy them. Once or twice I've played with the idea of adopting some girl or boy. During this last month, I got very friendly with the child who's been killed. She was absolutely natural, completely naive. She chattered on about her life and her experiences in pantomime with touring companies with Mum and Dad as a child in cheap lodgings, such a different life from any I've known. Never complaining, never seen it as sordid, just a natural, uncomplaining, hard-working child, unspoilt and charming. Not a lady, perhaps, but thank God, neither vulgar nor, abominable word, ladylike. I got more and more fond of Ruby. I decided, gentlemen, to adopt her legally. She would become, by law, my daughter. That, I hope, explains my concern for her and the steps I took when I heard of her unaccountable disappearance. There was a pause, then Superintendent Harper, his unemotional voice robbing the question of any offense, asked, "May I ask what your son-in-law and daughter-in-law said to that?" Jefferson's answer came back quickly. What could they say? They didn't, perhaps, like it very much. It's the sort of thing that arouses prejudice. But they behaved very well. Yes, very well. It's not as though, you see, they were dependent on me. When my son Frank married, I turned over half my worldly goods to him then and there. I believe in that. Don't let your children wait until you're dead. They want the money when they're young, not when they're middle-aged. In the same way, when my daughter Rosamond insisted on marrying a poor man, I settled a big sum of money on her. That sum passed to him at her death. So you see, that simplified the matter from the financial angle. I see, Mr. Jefferson, said Superintendent Harper. But there was a certain reserve in his tone. Conway Jefferson pounced upon it. But you don't agree, eh? It's not for me to say, sir, but families, in my experience, don't always act reasonably. I dare say you're right, Superintendent. But you must remember that Mr. Gaskell and Mrs. Jefferson aren't, strictly speaking, my family. They're not blood relations. That, of course, makes a difference, admitted the superintendent. For a moment, Conway Jefferson's eyes twinkled. He said, "That's not to say that they didn't think me an old fool. That would be the average person's reaction. But I wasn't being a fool. I know character. With education and polishing, Ruby King could have taken her place anywhere." Melchett said, "I'm afraid we're being rather impertinent and inquisitive, but it's important that we should get at all the facts. You propose to make full provision for the girl, that is, settle money upon her, but you hadn't already done so?" Jefferson said, "I understand what you're driving at, the possibility of someone's benefiting by the girl's death, but nobody could. The necessity formalities for legal adoption were underway, but they hadn't yet been completed." Melchett said slowly, "Then, if anything happened to you—" He left the sentence unfinished as a query. Conway Jefferson was quick to respond. "Nothing likely to happen to me. I'm a cripple, but I'm not an invalid. Although doctors do like to pull long faces and give advice about not overdoing things. I'm as strong as a horse. Still, I'm quite aware of the fatalities of life. My God, I've good reason to be. Sudden death comes to the strongest man, especially in these days of road casualties. But I'd provided for that. I made a new will about 10 days ago." "Yes?" Superintendent Harper leaned forward. "I left the sum of £50,000 to be held in trust for Ruby King until she was 25, when she would come into the principal." Superintendent Harper's eyes opened, so did Colonel Melchett's. Harper said in an almost awed voice, "That's a very large sum of money, Mr. Jefferson. In these days, yes, it is." "And you were leaving it to a girl you had only known a few weeks?" Anger flashed into the vivid blue eyes. "Must I go on repeating the same thing over and over again? I've no flesh and blood of my own. No nieces or nephews or distant cousins, even. I might have left it to charity. I prefer to leave it to an individual." He laughed. "Cinderella turned into a princess overnight. A fairy godfather instead of a fairy godmother. Why not? It's my money. I made it." Colonel Melchett asked, "Any other bequest, a small legacy to Edwards, my valet, and the remainder to Mark and Addie in equal shares? Would, the residue amount to a large sum?" "Probably not. It's difficult to say exactly. Investments fluctuate all the time. The sum involved after death duties and expenses had been paid would probably have come to something between £5,000 and £10,000 net." "I see. And you needn't think I was treating them shabbily. As I said, I divided up my estate at the time my children married. I left myself actually a very small sum. But after all, after the tragedy, I wanted something to occupy my mind. I flung myself into business. At my house in London, I had a private line put in connecting my bedroom with my office. I worked hard. It helped me not to think. And it made me feel that my mutilation had not vanquished me. I threw myself into work." His voice took on a deeper note. He spoke more to himself than to his audience. "And by some subtle irony, everything I did prospered. My wildest speculations succeeded. If I gambled, I won. Everything I touched turned to gold. Fate's ironic way of righting the balance, I suppose." Recollecting himself, he smiled wryly at them. "So you see, the sum of money I left Ruby was indisputably mine to do with as my fancy dictated." Melchett said quickly, "Undoubtedly, my dear fellow, we are not questioning that for a moment." Conway Jefferson said, "Good. Now I want to ask some questions in my turn, if I may. I want to hear more about this terrible business. All I know is that little Ruby was found strangled in a house some 20 miles from here." "That is correct, at Gossington Hall." Jefferson frowned. "Gossington? But that's Colonel Bantry's house." "Bantry? Arthur Bantry? But I know him. Known him and his wife. Met them abroad some years ago. I didn't realize they lived in this part of the world. Why, it's..." He broke off. Superintendent Harper slipped in smoothly. "Colonel Bantry was dining in the hotel here Tuesday of last week. You didn't see him?" Tuesday? No, we were back late. Went over to Hardenhead and had dinner on the way back." Melchett said, "Ruby King never mentioned the Bantrys to you?" Jefferson shook his head. "Never. Don't believe she knew them." "Sure she didn't. She didn't know anybody but theatrical folk and that sort of thing." He paused and then asked abruptly, "What's Bantry got to say about this?" "He can't account for it in the least. He was at a conservation meeting last night. The body was discovered this morning. He says he's never seen the girl in his life." Jefferson nodded. He said, "It certainly seems fantastic." Superintendent Harper cleared Cleared his throat. He said, "Have you any idea at all, sir, who could have done this? Good God, I wish I had." The veins stood out on his forehead. "It's incredible, unimaginable. I'd say it couldn't have happened if it hadn't happened. There's no friend of hers from her past life, no man hanging about or threatening her. I'm sure there isn't. She'd have told me if so. She's never had a regular boyfriend. She told me so herself." Superintendent Harper thought, "Yes, I dare say that's what she told you, but that's as may be." Conway Jefferson went on, "Josie would know better than anyone if there had... Josie would know better than anyone if there had been some man hanging about Ruby or pestering her. Can't she help? She says not." Jefferson said, frowning, "I can't help feeling it must be the work of some maniac. The brutality of the method, breaking into a country house, the whole thing so unconnected and useless. There are men of that type, men outwardly sane, who decoy girls, sometimes children, away and kill them. Sexual crimes, really, I suppose." Harper said, "Oh, yes, there are such cases, but we've no knowledge of anyone of that kind operating in this neighborhood." Jefferson went on. Tea time. Put it down here. I can get to it a little easier. "I've thought over all the various men I've seen with Ruby, guests here and outsiders, men she'd danced with. They all seem harmless enough, the usual type. She had no special friend of any kind." Superintendent Harper's face remained quite impassive, but unseen by Conway Jefferson, there was still a speculative glint in his eye. It was quite possible, he thought, that Ruby Keene might have had a special friend, even though Conway Jefferson had not known about it. He said nothing, however. The chief constable gave him a glance of inquiry, then rose to his feet. He said, "Thank you, Mr. Jefferson. That's all we need for the present." Jefferson said, You'll keep me informed of your progress?" Yes, we'll keep in touch with you." The two men went out. Conway Jefferson leaned back in his chair. His eyelids came down and veiled the fierce blue of his eyes. He looked suddenly a very tired man. Then after a minute or two, the lids flickered. He called, "Edwards!" From the next room, the valet appeared promptly. Edwards knew his master as no one else did. Others, even his nearest, knew only his strength. Edwards knew his weakness. He had seen Conway Jefferson tired, discouraged, weary of life, momentarily defeated by infirmity and loneliness. "Yes, sir?" Jefferson said, "Go on to Sir Henry Clithering. He's at Melbourne Abbas. Ask him from me to get here today if he can, instead of tomorrow. Tell him it's urgent." And that's all of chapter 6, and I think I'm just going to stop there. Sorry. But the lines are already doing this. Being so tired all the time. Or not really tired, just downright sleepy. I can't sleep at night like I'm supposed to do. But a few hours. Vicious cycle. But I'm still blessed. And I got a hat. Yay! I made a hat. And as if I needed to start on something else, started a knit version. You know, the knit thing I always do with this beautiful yarn. I love it. Called redwood. That plasticky stuff. Knitting it. Because knitting doesn't take as much yarn. Not quite. Make sure you come to tomorrow's live. I'm going to do a giveaway tomorrow. These are some choices. This or the gray cotton and all the other things I showed. Little baby hats. So, don't usually do it on a Wednesday, but I thought I would do it since some people can't be there on a weekend. So I'll do one on Wednesdays. I don't know that how long I'll do this, but I'll do it while I can. And then the other one on either Saturday or Sunday. Okay, I love y'all bunches. Be sweet, don't be ugly. Hey, Kelly's on tonight. Kelly's Crochet Adventures. You know how much fun she is. What's it called tonight? I don't know, but it's her live when we can come up on the screen, up on the panel if we want to with her. And it's at 7:05 Eastern. So be there, be square. I just love her. She just puts me in a good mood. Love y'all. Be sweet, don't be ugly. Bye-bye.